Hey everybody, what's up? It's Madden, and today I'm going to teach you a really quick tutorial on how to make a butterfly from just a simple plane and a few bone objects. And it's really not as hard as you might think. So let's get started. First thing to do is you're going to want to reset, go ahead and start from scratch. And personally, I prefer working in a little bit different situation than the standard layout. So I like to have a bigger view space with the perspective viewport. I'm also not going to need these grids over here on the side. So if you select the front view, press the G, and the same with the left view, then you can go ahead and get rid of those grids, which you really don't need. They kind of just clutter stuff up. The top view grid we are going to need. Now the first thing you're going to want to do for this project is go over here to the Helpers tab and click on Dummy. You're going to need two basic roots, two basic nodes for this item. So if you go ahead and create a node right there in the middle, it doesn't really matter how big it is or where you move. It just matters relative to the other sizes of the bones, because you can always resize it later. Go up here to the reference coordinate system and select world. That'll make it really easy to zero it out and make sure that you're starting in the very center of the scene. So go down here to the XYZ coordinate space and zero those out real quick. Now that we've got our main master root, we're going to go ahead and change the default name from dummy01. We're just going to call that, let's see, butterfly dot root. That'll work. I'm going to make it slightly a little bit bigger than that. And then to go ahead and create our second one, just go ahead and hold down shift when you have the scale tool and drag down. And that way you can create a second node. Just make a copy. No need to make an instance or a reference in this case. And once you have that accomplished, go ahead over here and rename that butterfly.node. So with the node and the root in place, next thing we need to do is make bones for the wing. So we're going to come up here to Systems tab and select the bone tool. Clicking in the top menu, if you hold down Alt W, you can go ahead and maximize that, zoom in a little bit. And the way to create bones when you have the tool selected is to go ahead, we're going to start these right in the middle, and click once with the left mouse button and then drag outwards. I think about there will probably do for these wings. Once you get the bone in the position that you're liking, just go ahead and left click to stop that part of the bone. You'll see that the more I drag, the more bone links I create, but I really only need one for this project. So to stop bone creation, right click. And also what it's going to end up doing is creating this nub here on the end, and that's really important when you're doing stuff for more advanced characters and using the physique modifier. But for our purposes, we're just going to be using a skin modifier to skin our mesh, so we don't need that. And since it's already highlighted, just go ahead and hit the delete button and get rid of it, because there's no need to hold on to it. So next thing you're going to need to do is create a second bone, and since we already still have the bone creation button depressed, you'll notice one thing, that if you hover over an already existing bone, the cursor will change to this plus sign. And what that means is that they want to know if you want to create a new bone onto that particular structure. And that's not what we want to do. So go ahead and Control Z to undo those. What you want to do is just make sure that the cursor is the standard white arrow. Click once again with the left mouse button, drag out about the exact same distance, so let's see, right about there. Left click again, and then right click to stop. Go ahead and hit delete to get rid of that nub. No need to hold on to that. So next thing we need to do is to right click first of all to get out of the create bones. Make sure that you're not creating any more bones. That's all you need. And click the move tool, and if we zoom in here, you'll notice that it's not quite on center, and we really want it to be as close as possible. So if you go back up here to the reference coordinate system, go back down to world, you can zero it out at the bottom as well. So 0 for the X, 0 for the Y, and 0 for the Z. We'll go ahead and put that right in the center of where we want it to be. Do the exact same thing for the other bone. 0, 0, and 0. The other thing is that these bones aren't exactly straight. So if you want them to be perfectly straight, if you're not happy with that, you can do the same thing. Change this to the world coordinate system. Come down here and you'll notice that the Z is just slightly off. So if you want to make that 0, it'll put that bone exactly perpendicular to the center line. Do the same thing with the other side. This one you'll notice though the Z is at 179.839, so obviously you want to make that 180. So that'll be perfect. Hit Alt W to go ahead and get back to the quad menus. And the next thing to do would be to go ahead and link these bones together. So the best way to do that is to select the bottom of the hierarchy first. So the two wing bones, we're going to go ahead and take those and we're going to hit this select and link button and click and drag while they're selected to this middle node. So the wing bones are going to be parented to this middle node, the node that eventually control the body of our butterfly, and then deselect and select the middle node and parent that to the master root. So that way the standard hierarchy is set up so that you have one node that doesn't move, that locks into a furniture spot, and then you have a second node parented to that, and any other node or bones that are hooked onto that as a parent-child relationship will then go ahead and move where it moves. So that's a pretty standard setup as far as a hierarchy of bones goes. Next thing we're going to need to do is go ahead and create the mesh. And that's a pretty simple thing to do for this project because all we're going to need is a plane. And the plane starts out standard using the rectangle for the creation method, but for this I'm just going to go ahead and switch that over to square to make it real easy on us. Go back to the top view and maximize that, and then go ahead and create a square that's just about the same size as our wing bones are. That'll work out just fine. Once again, go to the world and zero this out so that it is exactly the way we want it, so that there's no awkward creases when we go ahead and start animating. This is default named plane 01. I can go ahead and just name that butterfly dot mesh. That'll work. The other thing we need to rename are these bones. So this one is bone 01. We're just going to call that right dot wing, and this one over here we'll call that left dot wing. The naming isn't as important, it's just for your own organization, to be honest. So alright, so after you've got your plane created, what you're going to need to do is go ahead and go to the modify panel, and selecting the plane, you'll see that the default down here is 4 length segments and 4 width segments. I'm really only going to need 2 by 2, and it's always a good idea to go ahead and keep your poly count as low as possible. And for something like this, which is just a simple plane with just one crease and just 2 bones animating the butterfly, you really don't need a lot of mesh information in there. So once you figured out how many length segments and width segments you want to use for your mesh object, now is a good time to go ahead and add an edit poly modifier. So scroll down the modifier list until you see edit poly, which is right here. And this is important so that you can go ahead and make the mesh work properly with the texture that you're going to add to it. So you go down here and select the polygon selection tool and either drag a marquee like this around all 4 of the polygons. You'll see that this square that we made, this square plane, consists of these 4 polygons here. Either drag a marquee around them all, or you can go ahead and hit Control A to select them all. It does the same thing. Then you're going to go down here to the bottom of the edit poly stack, and you'll find an area down here called the polygon material IDs area. And when you're making a multi-sub texture, you're going to need to use this quite extensively because you have to add as many set IDs as you have materials. But for this case, we're only using one material. Down here in the polygon smoothing groups, it doesn't matter which one you choose so long as you only have one selected. So you, for instance, you wouldn't want to have more than one like this. You wouldn't want to have 3 or 4 depressed. Just make sure that only one of them is selected. So once you have the set ID set to 1 and have the select ID set to 1, come up here into the create selection sets box and go ahead and type in butterfly space, and then you're going to need to put an open bracket 0 close bracket. And if you're familiar with the naming structure of IMView, the previewer, basically 0 is the first texture that's going to be used in your product. So the first texture starts out at 0, and then the second texture will be 1, third would be 2, so forth and so on. And it's really vital that you go ahead and name this properly, because otherwise the textures aren't going to show up the way that you want them to. And to check that, if you want to figure out if you've done it right, if you deselect the polygons, go back up here to this drop down menu, the name selection sets drop down menu, you'll see that you have it in there. So just go ahead and make sure that you have that done. Now we've got the mesh in place. Looks like it's exactly where we need it to be. And so the next step would be to go ahead and add a material to it. So if you hit M on your keyboard, bring up the material editor, and up in this top left-hand slot, we're going to go ahead and add our material. So down here in the diffuse color, it always defaults as a little bit darker color than pure white. So if you click on that, you can just drag the slider down a little bit because you want to brighten up your mesh when it's actually in a scene. Over here to the right of the diffuse is where you're going to put the map for the positive texture, which is going to be a bitmap. So go ahead and click that box, select bitmap, and then go ahead and navigate to where you have kept your butterflies or whatever it is that you're working on. Here I have this particular one I set up previously, and it's pretty simple. If you want to go ahead and view the image, it's just got a real simple white outline. Is probably the reason I chose this, is because it made the making of the opacity map that much easier. If you bring this into Photoshop, use any kind of selection method that you want to select the white space, and then create new layer, invert the selection, and go ahead and print black on the outside and white on the inside. Because what you want for your opacity map, if we go back up to apparent, look over here in the opacity area, this box here that says none now, that's where you're going to want to put your opacity map. So go back up to bitmap again, and this is the opacity map that we're going to use. So double click on that, and if we go to view image for that, you'll see that the opacity, anything that's black is going to be purely see-through, and anything that's white will be completely solid, and any variation of gray in between will be levels of translucency. So most butterflies like this, if I was going to get really detailed with this project, what I would end up doing is actually putting shades of gray through the wings so that you could actually see through the wings, and that's how you would accomplish that. But in this case, for this tutorial, I just basically left it white and black. So black will show nothing and white will show everything, basically is how it works. So now that we have that set up, I can show you what that looks like on the mesh. You have to go up to the very top of the height of the parent. If I click, there's two ways to give the material. There's more than two ways, but there are two basic ways to set a material onto a mesh. You can either click the material in the box and drag it to the mesh that you want, is one way, or if you have the mesh selected, you can just click this button here, assign material to selection. So that's what we want. And you'll notice it just shows up gray, and that's because we haven't clicked this show standard map and viewport thing yet. But I wanted to show you something first. If you go to the map of the butterfly, which would be the positive texture, which is this, and if I go ahead and click that button on this level, what you'll see is that you still see the white area around the outside of the butterfly. Same thing will happen if I go to this opacity version. So this is the opacity with the black and white. If I click the button on this, then all you're going to see is the black with the white. So it's important to remember that if you go all the way up to the very top of the parent of this particular material, anything with an opacity, and then click on the show standard map and viewport, that's when you'll get what you're looking for. You're looking for the butterfly image, the diffuse map, also along with the opacity map together. And that's what that is. So after you're done with that, you can go ahead and close up the materials, and if you're happy with the way that the mesh looks and the size that it is, then it's about time to start skinning.